Okay, you are live.
We are live.
You are live.
Yes, we're live, and I'm with Pat Battstone. He was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he moved to Boston in '73 and is still living there. So, Pat?
Okay. I just was able to share this. And
okay.
It looks like I'm sharing it on my screen, so that way people that know me that don't know how to get to you can see us and vice versa.
Right. So, Pat, tell us all about you, because you, it's going to be a surprise for many people, because he is a wonderful musician, improviser, avant-garde, but he also can play, you know, any other.
I can play rock and roll and gospel.
Yeah. And jazz.
And jazz. Actually, I've been playing classical since this whole work at home started. With I've had a lot more time, and I've had time to sit down and actually learn new pieces that I haven't had a chance in, say, 20 years to do. So the work from home and quarantine has been really a renaissance for me.
It has been for many people. It has been for many people, you know, learn new things or get in depth.
I looked at it as a golden opportunity to like pull out of whatever routine I was in and focus back on getting my routine together. Also, I says, you know, in another year or two, I'll probably take my pension. And there's a very, I mean, I've been thinking very hard about splitting time between here and in Italy. And I says, well, you know, am I disciplined enough to be in Italy for 3 months without like going into self-destruct or just becoming totally useless? So this has been a really good opportunity to, you know, focus internally, externally, and sort of get things, you know, do a practice session. So, should I start? Or have
yes, please tell us about your two lives.
Two lives. Actually, I consider it one, but we'll go into all that in a little bit. I guess initially when I thought I'm going to do an interview, the first thing to tell people is, well, who are you? You know, who is this guy? What does he do? So I'm a pianist. I was born in Cincinnati last century, right? And I played music. I learned how to play music there, met a lot of really great musicians who sort of pointed me towards Boston to come up and go to Berkeley. So I came up to Berkeley in '73, and I've been here just about the entire time. A lot of the time was spent doing musical activities. I'd say the majority of that time was doing musical activities, and probably, I think around '78, '79, I started going back to school to learn engineering. And at the time, at the college I was going to, we had you work half a year, you go to school half a year. And I found this place called Draper Laboratories that everybody was talking about. I'm working with Apollo engineers. We're working on the space shuttle. We're doing all this. And I said, what is this place? It's in Cambridge. Well, it turns out it was the MIT Instrumentation Laboratory. And that, they changed the name, but that was the people that gave us the Apollo guidance system. Dr. Draper was the father of, you know, inertial guidance. So he took 3 gyros, you know, the spinning tops, and something that sensed how fast you were going, and put it in a box and got it to fly in an airplane. And later, NASA asked him if he could fly it in a jet and get people to the moon, and he volunteered for it. So we'll talk about that, but that's been a fascinating side thing. But I've been doing music. It was conducive to doing music at the time. So we can go into that. And as of late, probably since, at least I think 5 years ago now, I discovered bel canto and these wonderful Italian singers. And I had never played with singers before because they were all da 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 da, da or ba-doo 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 type things. And I heard this one singer that totally caught me by surprise, Tiziana Giglioni. And that really opened my eyes. And so I started looking into who. And so I found a number of things, which we can talk about that later. But that brought me to Italy on essentially a lark that I just had an intuition I should go. And it was either I was going to go to Milan or I was going to go to Bari. And Bari won out because the price was, I think, much lower. That was the only reason. So,
by the way, Tiziana is a friend of mine.
Oh, I know. I saw when what's her name? Sheila. When Sheila came, I saw you and Tiziana together. So I says,
yeah. And when Jay Clayton comes, she's always with us too. Jay Clayton and Sheila Jordan. Yes, we're friends. Yes. And she's an awesome singer.
Well, I have a story that actually I told Jay when I first met her. I says, because we have one mutual friend, and her name is Christine Hahn. And Christine was very close with Oregon, and Oregon was very close with Paul Bley. Well, Christine was a Cincinnatian that I had known back and forth. And when Bley died, there was a memorial for it up in his village. And Christine was there, and there was an Italian singer with me. And we're playing River's Tales, which is Tiziana and Jay, doing vocal improvisations with Tiziano. There's a drummer with the name Tiziano.
I have to think about it. I can't.
Tostoni, maybe?
I don't know.
Anyway, we're driving down the road. Tiziana messages me. So I'm talking to Tiziana, and we're listening to her record. And Christine says, I've got a friend in New York who's a great vocal improviser. Have you ever heard of Jay Clayton? And then Tiziana, me, and it was Antonella started laughing. I says, this is Jay Clayton on here. So it was a real like synergistic thing. When we got back to Cherry Valley, to where the festival or the memorial was, there was Sheila. And she says, well, there's Jay's roommate. So the circle was completely tied together.
Yes.
So I told that when I first met Jay, I told her that. She goes, you know, my friend Christine. And I told her the story. She thought it was nice. So that's was my Tiziana Jay story. Anyway, so where do we start? I think, my first thought was start with the first thing that I can remember that really impacted me. And I think that was February 64. Well, we used to, all the families in America sat down by the TV on Sunday night. It was like an Italian dinner, where all the entire family comes together and you're right there and you're doing something. Well, what we did in America is we watched the TV. And there was one TV show which had a variety of talents named Ed Sullivan. And he saw there was this crowd in Heathrow when he was there. And he says, whatever this is causing this, I want them on my show. And nobody had ever heard of these guys before. And he came out and says, ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles. And people went crazy. They played live. They did I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, you know, and the hair flopping and the girls screaming. That was the biggest cultural revolution I have ever experienced. Right then, I could see it. I can see my father's reaction because he was horrified. So that at that point, I say that's really where my musical desire started, because I wanted to be part of that revolution. I really wanted a piece of that. When we went to school the next day, everybody was in a tizzy. Our music teacher really wasn't up for that one at all. And a few years later, I played trumpet, and I learned all those tunes. I found a music book, and I played Ferry Across the Mersey and the Beatles tunes and Dave Clark 5 and Chad and Jeremy and all those tunes. And that was thanks to Ed Sullivan. He brought all those people over. The Beatles were on three weeks in a row, and then came the Dirty Boys, the Rolling Stones, and they had an edge at the time, right from the beginning. So that's where it started. And I think later, my neighbor, this had to be 60, no, it was still in the mid-60s. My neighbor was in a rock and roll band that played a lot of James Brown material, mostly like the real Motown and soul music that was going on around 65. Wilson Pickett, James Brown, all the stuff from Detroit. Remember, Detroit, Cincinnati is, 3 hours south of Detroit. So we're getting all that music as part of the vicinity. And that was dance, people loved to dance back then. So I went over to my neighbor's house every afternoon and sat down at his piano out in that cold garage and learned all my chords. He would show me some things, I'd imitate it. And that was my education. That was my first piano teacher. Just learning chords, and then learning chords, looking at a book and learning the chords. Eventually, I was able to pick up a little electronic organ like the Doors did.
Yeah.
And like they had that sort of organ. And well, that had to be 67, because 67, 68-ish, because I sat down with the first 2 Doors records, albums, and I put it on the stereo, and I had my organ right next to the stereo. And I learned all the solos and all the chords for those 2 entire albums. Well, at that point, I'm ready for a rock and roll band. And sure enough, I think from the time I was probably 14, I was playing in rock and roll bands and, progressive rock bands, etc., and going to concerts. I remember I saw Hendrix and Joplin to do late 68. I saw Clapton later with Derek and the Dominoes, Zappa. Oh, God. Laura Nyro. Oh, my God. I can remember that concert like, somebody said I felt like I was in church with Laura Nyro. She was amazing. Joni Mitchell. Gosh, the list goes on. Santana, yes. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and of course, and then Keith Emerson really became, somebody I was like really enamored with.
I envy you. You can't imagine how much I envy you right now.
Just the fact that people say, "Oh, Janis Joplin," I says, I have pictures where I was in the front row and I could have grabbed her leg. That's how close I was.
Wow.
And as I tell people, I says, I was young enough, I was old enough to go, because people 2 years younger than me didn't go to concerts. So that was the age of going to concerts. And I'm young enough that I'm not a total, burnout from the 60s. So I can remember all this stuff. So perfect age, perfect timing. And You know, I mean, I went to festivals where it wasn't really beautiful, like things really had turned sour. But I saw a lot of it. And no, I didn't go to Woodstock. I did not go to Woodstock. But right after Woodstock, that sound system was heading west. And a friend of ours was putting on a concert with Paul Butterfield Blues Band, Grand Funk Railroad, some locals, and Vanilla Fudge. And Billy Graham lent him the Woodstock sound system. So this is a week later, and sure enough, it poured down rain. And so we had a mini Woodstock there a week after the real one. So anyway, so from there, I finally, by the time I was 18, going to college, I went to University of Cincinnati, and I moved in, very quickly. I moved into an apartment, and it was around the time there were a number of books out. Carlos Castaneda's book, Don Juan, The Yaqui Way of Knowledge. I think Be Here Now. We had just heard not Ken Kesey, Richard Alpert on the radio one night. I says, wow, all this makes sense. And so those books were coming in. People were talking in terms of that. And they were talking about two musicians, actually about four musicians in Cincinnati. And there were two drummers they were talked about. One was Chuck Fertel, and he's still a great friend of mine. He lives in New York. John Montecalvo absolutely adores him. They're, you know, the two of them, when they met, they were just like best buddies, like right from the get-go. And a guy named Grover Mooney. And Mooney, by the way, is in Fred Hirsch's book, as is Jimmy McGarry, the horn player. So I had heard about these people, and I said, it just dawned, I says, I want to meet these people. And within a couple of days, I end up meeting this guy, this drummer named Chuck. And Chuck just kept giving me little drops of information, knowledge that it would just like go off like a fireworks in my head, you know. And so I says, I need, you know, he's telling me something. So there, I knew there was something going on. Meanwhile, I'm meeting, you know, I've met Grover, I've met his wife, Joyce. Joyce became my first piano teacher at the age of 18. And I met McGarry. I met pretty much all the Cincinnati crowd. But then there was something I wanted. I knew that was limited, and I felt compelled to go up to Berkeley. And I says, well, what are you going to do? Well, Chuck's up there. He's going to, I need to know my next step. That was kind of like, I know if I go there, my next step is going to be obvious. And so I called my buddy. It was winter about 1973, maybe. Yeah. And I says, listen, you want to go to Boston? He says, yeah, sure. When? I says, now. He says, okay, how are we going to get there? I says, we'll hitchhike. He says, you sure? I says, yeah, should be easy. And he goes, yeah, why not? What do we need? I says, you know, pack some clothes. We'll be gone for, you know, we'll go up there. We'll hang around and come back as soon as we can. He says, okay. Well, it was, I don't believe in superstition or coincidence, but we were dropped off at the first ramp, and it was like the third car picked us up and took us to another place where it was a clover leaf. Well, by the time we walked over to the next off ramp, some car came and picked us up there. This happened 3 times in a row, and we weren't outside 10 minutes total, and we had a ride all the way to New York City. Well, to New Jersey, to Newark, New Jersey, which is not quite New York City, but it was way too much of a coincidence. You know, so not saying it's superstitious. It just felt like this is right, and
yes,
you're on a roll, and you know, it was you're compelled. It was really, there was a something very compelling that I knew I had to go there. Kind of like when I knew I had to go to Italy. So enter, and I don't even know where Chuck lives. I've got an address for some guy named Dave Phillip that I've never met, somewhere in the midst of a Boston suburb, and we didn't care. We were just going. I did find a number for him, so I was able to like tell him that we were coming. But and turned out Dave Phillips was a good friend of Chuck's. I was very close to Dave for numbers of years. He was a great pianist up here. So next thing is we're in Berkeley. We're going around. We're meeting people. I think Herbie Hancock's sextet was playing at the Jazz Workshop that night. It didn't matter to me. I knew I had to be there. I just knew it. And there was a feeling when I first came to Boston with our stage band when I was in high school. The minute we got into Boston, there was a "you belong here" feeling. And I had that same exact feeling when we got there hitchhiking. So that was, I knew that Boston was the next, had to be. So went home, told my dad, of course, meanwhile, the trip home was even more, karmic or whatever you want to call it. I went to a ride board and Binghamton State. Oh, even better. When we're leaving, there was, we were hitchhiking off out of Boston, and the people, you were teaming up with people. So there was a lady in the group that we were with named Ann Tappan. And I told her I was going to Berkeley. She says, well, that's fine and dandy, but Berkeley's going to be a limited thing. She says, you're going to learn your building blocks there. She says, but they're not going to teach you anything about digging inside of yourself or about beauty or about, the nature of music. She says, you're just going to get fundamental building blocks. You're going to get your harmony. You're going to learn, how to put your your middle finger or your thumb under your third finger when you're doing a scale. She says, but you really need to study with this guy named Charlie Banakis. And she says, so when you get up here, put yourself on Charlie's list. It takes 1.5 years to finally get to Charlie because he's got such a waiting list, and go to Berkeley. Get your discipline going with Berkeley, and by the time Charlie calls you, you'll be done with Berkeley, and you'll be ready for him. And sure enough, that did happen. I had already gone back to Berkeley, and I had one lesson with Charlie, and I never looked back at Berkeley again. I didn't even bother getting my deposit or any of the tuition back. I was done because he was such a monster. The first lesson, it took me 14 hours a day to practice to be able to be ready for the next one. So thank you, Ann Tappan. She may be listening. I finally connected with her after 40 years. And she vaguely remembered that, but she had a notebook from March of '73. And she says, yeah, I was with this guy named Witz. Who was Witz? I said, his name was Horowitz. And he studied with Charlie too, because Charlie and I had talked about, he saw the names written there. So anyway, I'm really chatting away about this. So we're up to 73. We're at 2020 now. So fast forward a little bit. What else can I talk about at Berkeley? No, I came up and, Berkeley was a stepping stone. And I knew it when I went to return to home. I says, well, it's a good excuse because I just couldn't tell my parents, hey, I'm leaving University of Cincinnati. I'm going to go to Boston and become a famous musician or something, because that just wasn't going to make it. But if I told them I was going to college there, it might soften the blow a little bit. It didn't. But so
you got in trouble.
No, I just created a little rift between, you know, my father and I. But that's you got to do that. Although I was studying with Joanne Brackeen once, well, for a long time. But at one point she says, you know, you're playing piano like your dad's going to take it away from you. And I went, damn. That was it. She nailed it. I mean, she really nailed that one. And sure enough, when I got home, because she was in New York, I was studying down there and driving back and forth. When I got home, there was a letter there from my dad saying he really wished I'd quit playing music. Oh. And I went, bingo. Oh, yeah, because I was obsessed with it. And he didn't think that was healthy. But unfortunately, well, I took it. That was his opinion. I says he's welcome to it, but I thought it was very healthy. You know. So anyway, so that was an interesting Joanne story. But so what happened? Summer of Cincinnati. Last summer in Cincinnati, I worked a day gig, working in a state park. That was when I first became acquainted with jazz musicians, really. And the first one was Bill Evans, the Bill Evans Trio. And we were able to see those in a beautiful auditorium. That was my first jazz concert, was seeing the Bill Evans Trio. And later I saw Steve Kuhn. Steve Kuhn Trio with, God, I can't think of his name right now. Drummer up in Rome. Crap. Can see his face anyway. Who? Yeah, he lives in Rome now. Drummer. Friend of Paul's. It was on a couple of Paul's records. Crap, I can't think of his name. But to see Steve Kuhn, saw Ahmad Jamal, and a week later there was something I had never experienced in my life. Cecil Taylor played at this little jazz club, and it was Cecil Taylor Unit Structures, Spring of Two Blue Jays. So it was a bass. I don't think there was no bass. It was drums, Andrew Cyril, Jimmy Lyons, and Cecil, and they played one song for an hour and a half. And I had never experienced such an onslaught of sounds in my life. So that was sort of baptism by fire. But this is what we're seeing in Cincinnati. And I think at the time, Cecil was teaching in Antioch College in Yellow Springs near Dayton, Ohio. But there was a lot of good music coming through. Of course, Grover and Jimmy McGarry, and there was this crazy piano player named Ed Moss who owned jazz club after jazz club after jazz club. And he was a real stickler for, you know, if you were in there, you were quiet, you were listening, or he would start beating on the piano, telling you to get out. He really just demanded attention. But he was a genius, and it was his club, so he could get away with that. So who else do we see? Well, of course, by that time, Fred Hirsch he's a year younger than me. He is now playing with Grover McGarry and this blues singer named Popeye Moppin, and that was an amazing group. So I became very close, well, not close, acquainted with Fred. A couple of years later, when I'm at Berkeley, Fred comes up because he wants to see Berkeley and New England. He stays with me. Shortly after that, Grover arrives, and he's moving in because he's fed up with the Cincinnati political scene. He was playing good music, but he had so many parking tickets, the police were coming to his gig to arrest him, and he would have to jump out the fire escape. These were fun times, you know, because they were on the third floor of this club called the Family Owl, run by a guitar player named Sandy Nasson. And there was this big sort of ball mirror that you could look down the stairs from the bandstand, and he would see the police coming, he'd drop his sticks and jump out the fire escape. That continued when he was in Boston, by the way, too. He did not leave that in Cincinnati.
Oh my goodness.
So Grover came up, and I mean, he was a really top-notch. He became sort of the Boston drummer for a long time. A very intimidating character. Everybody loved him. Everybody hated him. Everybody respected him. Joe Hunt, he says he was basically an Elvin Jones that was Irish. He says, you know, Joe Hunt, the great drummer, he says, but he was such a goofball, such a character that a lot of the times you didn't understand that he was really brilliant, because he was such a, you know, so off the wall, you just thought he was a comedian. Anyway, that was Grover. He really was a mentor for me for a long time. I lived with him and his family probably 3 times. One point we had a duplex apartment. He was on the second floor of one side of the house and I was on the second floor. So we shared the back stairs. I had a piano in his place as well as in my place, and we'd have sessions there all night. So that was going through the 80s. And this was where 3 pianists or 4 pianists, there was myself, Dave Phillips, Mike Shea, Alan Rowe. We were all playing in, I mean, usually pianists are like really, you know, this is my piano. I'm the piano player, you know, we're very territorial. We played, all 4 of us were playing all night. Nobody ever complained they didn't get to play enough. And, you know, Grover was there, and a number of bass players would come in. One Cuban conga player would come over all the time. He'd come over middle of the daytime and say, okay, you listen, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And for a year, he taught me, he just came over and did a clave for me. And eventually it caught. It just caught, you know. He said, now you got it. Now you got it. You don't need me. And I hardly saw him after that. Okay. So that was the 80s. Oh, yeah. And by that time, okay. So we want to digress a little bit. Into the 70s, things are, yeah, I don't know, things are in change. And but I'm not going to go into the whys, but I started working a day gig instead of working as a musical. Actually, yeah, instead of playing music only, I started working a day gig. And that didn't really work out. And then somebody pointed me, they says, well, listen, you've got a great math ability. Why don't you do something with it? And I says, like what? He says, you know, make some money or something, you know, be an engineer, be a banker, be a this, be a that. I says, whoa, never thought of that. Jeez, you know, who'd have thunk? So Northeast, I was able to get into Northeastern really quick. And that's where they had the work half a year, go to school half a year. And I was able to get in with Draper Labs. And so I was working with Apollo engineers, ex-Apollo engineers by that time, in one of the NASA groups there. And that was totally fascinating for just, I mean, I was still in my mid-20s. So as a kid that grew up out in, actually, wasn't in Cincinnati. I was in the very rural district. I mean, it was really, we call them, it was kind of, we called it the sticks. We were really like 2 counties out, and it was very, you know, farmland, where baling hay was one of the teenagers' chief money makers. So all this was pretty fascinating. I met a lot of the people that were inventors of Apollo. Apollo just wasn't, you know, let's go to the moon and come back. Apollo was the first PC. Remember, computers back that time were filled rooms. This was 2 foot by 2 foot, and it really was the first, portable computer. It was the first time they had used these types of equations, and the guidance system were just being developed. These are the same things that are in every airplane. When you're flying, it's Doc Draper's invention that's taking you there. So all this was very interesting, and they were also talking about satellites that were giant erector sets. And so those were large space structures, and we were working with large space structures trying to doing various simulations. So that was very fascinating, and it was right at the turn, it was right at the very edge of, like somebody says, you're right at the side of the mountain looking over with that. They were doing the first of everything they were asked to do. We didn't mass produce anything, but we did the first. And so there were all these inventors and people that were very creative. So being a musician, you were able also to be an engineer because you were in a creative sort of atmosphere. And for me, I got into what's called real-time applications for, like the brain of your car or the brain of the airplane, where you're talking to different sensors. So you're learning how to communicate. So a musician learns how to communicate. That's right running along. The same thing, one of my first things that, one of my sort of, essential things was I could deal with the timing of a computer. So if you're getting things at very fast time, then you can do half time, you do quarter time. Well, that's really is, there's the only thing between the engineering and music is a guy named Johann Sebastian Bach. So I mean, he was a mathematician from what I could see. I remember we even noted that he was using Fibonacci series for some of his two-part inventions. So that was that. So at this point, I'm mixing the two of them. I've got the apartment. And at one point, I wanted to study jazz again because I had studied classical with an old Russian maestro named Serge Konis for a number of years, and we learned the things I'm still working on. Scriabin, who his uncle was Scriabin's first composition teacher, and his other uncle and Scriabin both studied with the same piano teacher. So he had a very close affinity to the music and the style in which Scriabin played. He knew that era of Russian sort of right at the turn of the Romantic, getting into the sort of intensity that the Russians had turned in 1910-ish or so. So that was a real, for me, that was a once in a lifetime, because he was old. He was showing me his pieces, Scriabin's pieces, and I'm still working on those now. Man was a very dear friend. Also, his wife was French, which we'll talk about French wives later, having had one for a while. So where do we go? How far are we? Okay, we're day gig.
Well, we're almost, I would like you to talk about your music.
Oh, okay, so probably
because we've been live for 40 minutes now.
Whoa! And I says, what if I run out of things to talk about after 15 minutes? Yeah. No way.
Okay. I think you could go on for 3 hours or so. You have so many interesting things to say.
Okay, I'll try to keep this. Okay, during the time where I was studying with Joanne, I was able to meet a very influential person, became friends with his family named Paul Bley. And through Paul Bley, of course, that's how I met Tiziana, because I would spend a couple of weeks of summer at Paul's house up in Cherry Valley in upper state New York, and I'd stay at the studio, and I'd go through all his CDs. He had hundreds of CDs on the wall, and if there was a CD that had been opened, I'd copy it. And I saw Tiziana Giglioni and Paul Bley lyrics. And I says, wait a minute, Paul with a singer? I mean, because he's playing with Anthony Braxton or, Lyons, all the Albert Eiler. He's playing with all these, real avants. I says, well, who is this Tiziana? Well, that was the door that opened there. And I put a video of Paul playing the piano because we'd be over at his house, and Paul would look at us and says, so Patrick, why don't you play that piece for me that you wrote this morning, huh? Well, he's a little intimidating. So, you want me to play the piano? So you're scared to death, and you sit down and play something, and then Paul has a few comments. Really was a character, but later he would sit down often and play the piano, and so I taped him, and I put one on YouTube. I think probably Theo Allegretti or somebody from Rome called this piano player up down in Monopoly and says, hey, check this out. And it was Johnny Lenocci. And Johnny was he was the ringleader of all the avant-garde people down in Puglia. And Lenocci calls me, says, how did you get this video of Paul? I says, well, I took it last week. He says, you know Paul? Paul's my hero. Well, then we had a relationship going back and forth. I would just, anything that I had of Paul. And then I discovered one of Johnny's CDs up in Paul's place too. So we became really tight, and I started meeting some of his people. And one of that person was Antonella Chiona. And at the time, both me and one of Paul's other close friend, Richard Poole, were putting together, we were trying to find a mutual voice. Not just trying to play tunes, but we wanted to play an improvisation where a voice came out. And Paul, one of the things Paul taught was improvement is based on the thing, not that you do better, your good thing that you do better, it's the worst thing that you eliminate. And Poole was of the same mentality. So we'd record and we'd listen. And we listened for, hours and hours. If we had four hours of recording, we probably listened for 40. And we would say, this doesn't belong here. Or they're the obvious things that are really bad, right away. But then there's the things that aren't wrong, but they don't belong there. So eventually this little glimmering voice started coming out, and we took that and added other people, and they said it was really simple to come and play with you because you had a core essence going. So I was doing that with other people, and this young Antonella, pardon me, liked that idea. She says, well, I'd like to collaborate with this. And eventually she came to Boston, and we did some traveling. We went to Montreal, we went to Cherry Valley for Paul's thing. And we did a recording with Richard Poole, myself and her. And 3 months later, she hosted me in Puglia. I found a nice bed and breakfast for her, drove her around, and she did the same for me. She says, I just want to show you gratitude. And that trip, I met Gianna Montecalvo. I met Francesco Massara. Francesco Cusa? Everybody knows Cusa.
I know Gianna Montecalvo, but I don't know Francesco Cusa. No.
Okay. These were the people right in Puglia. Francesco Cusa is from Sicily, but he's everywhere. I mean, I've seen him pictures with you name it. I mean, the man is like, I thought everybody in the world knew him. But and there was one big band called Snake Noir, fellow from Sardinia, Daniel Leda, led it. It was like a John Zorn thing. And so I was there for 3 or 4 days recording with this free improv band. So those are the people I met there were the people that really I still have very close relationships with. And then you start meeting people in their circle, and then things click. And next thing you know, I've got a CD with Gianna Montecalvo, and well, she came to America, so Gianna was here, and we met a lot of her friends down in New York. Maria Sartori, the Detrizio brothers were down there. We played with Ron McClure. Up here, she met everybody that I could introduce her to. We made a CD together, and Leo Records loved it. So he put that out. Of course, then I'm meeting a lot of Gianna's friends because please take care of Gianna. All these people love her dearly. So I'm meeting all these people. Take care of my sweetheart. Take care of my tesoro. You know, so I became a hero. Oops. Simona Chiampi just she was a Gianna student too. So then I started going more and more, and the place feels like home. Unfortunately, the front door is locked. Right, both doors are locked right now. So
yes.
As of late, well, actually, right at the get-go, when Mary Luisa Caporso, one of the Pulian singers, was in Boston, we had recorded with in Puglia with some of the people that were part of that big band, and we were producing it. We were looking for different covers and different artists, and I said, well, I had seen this one Daniela Chiona, who was friends with Antonella Chiona, and Antonella lived in Martina Franca, and Daniela lived in Francavilla. I says, okay, Franca, Chiona, there must be some connection. Who's this Daniela? Well, it turned out there was no connection other than they had both been at the similar places. But I saw some artwork. And this one, how do we do this? Right there was just, I said, that's it. That's what we're playing. When we're playing music, that's what I see when I'm playing. So I wrote her and I said, could I use one of your paintings? And we started to go back and forth. And she says, well, why don't you send me your music so I can hear what you're seeing, and maybe I'll paint to it. Well, I didn't hear from her for about 10 days. And she says, well, it was horrible or what? She says, are you kidding? She had gone into a delirium, just total absorption. Well, she called it immersion. And she did a series of 10 huge paintings in those 10 days. I says, oh, there's more to this. Well, yeah. Sure enough, we used one of her portraits for Gianna's album. The immersion, we used one of them, and then there was another CD and Mary Louisa says, listen, we've already got 2 that sound very much. What's the point of putting out a 3rd one? I said, so I can make a nice cover. She says, oh, okay, no. So there was another one where I went back. I says, well, I'm in Puglia for 3 weeks. And one of my buddies from Boston came, Chris Rathbun. And he played with Gianna. He was on the Gianna record. We went up with Valentina Gramazio. We did a house concert up there. And I says, well, you should meet these other musicians. Let's have a session. And that became New Destinations. And that was where Georgia Santoro, I first met her. And at the time, I didn't know much about her, but I knew that she was a link. You know, she was an essential link. And both Georgia and Chiara Liuzzi, who I had never played with, but I had been talking to, because she put out a book called Elenka, which is a propeller, where she talks, she parallels, you know, taste or sound with sound, you know, how you can take various elements, just you can feel something, and then after that you're going to play different. And she has a record where she put all that together. So I liked her concept. Man, I knew Georgia was essential too. So I called a session. I didn't even know Georgia knew how to improvise. I just knew she was essential. It was like one of those where gotta have it. And we went over. Of course, we're all walking on, you know, eggshells because we're trying to feel everybody out. So I went over and I says, "Oh, what's this big flute and all these pedals here?" She goes, "Oh, check this out." And it was like electricity. It was like a Jimi Hendrix chord or something. I went, "Okay, we're all set." So that was the first time with Georgia. So later, I mean, we had a pretty good, that record did really good up here. And I went back, okay, so, but I kept the dialogue with Georgia. And at one point, Daniela does a series of paintings. And this one, I don't know, is that reflecting too much? How's that?
You can shift it just a little bit. Okay.
Okay, this and these paintings. When I saw this, I immediately, you know, I saw the whole series and I says, "I want to play to this." And she says, "Yeah?" I says, "Yeah." And I says, "And I think Georgia would be the other person." And I showed him to Georgia and I says, "Check these." She goes, "Oh my God." I says, "You want to play to this?" She says, "I want to do the whole record with you." And that became Dream Note. These were called, the series was Appunti Onirici, right? The dream, the notes of a dream.
Yes.
So we put, yeah, that turned out to be a master. I consider one of our masterpieces.
Yes, that's the record. That's the record I've got.
Yeah.
And I came to see your concert with Georgia,
yeah,
which was amazing, amazing. I loved it. And I'm so sorry I didn't record it because, oh my goodness.
You know, that's the thing. You never record the greatest nights. You know, there was, or the tape players.
That was so great.
No, I was really happy. I looked up and I said, "She came," because I knew you were busy and it was going to take a while for you to get there. But I kept saying, "Okay, we're going to start late. She's going to be here." Okay.
Yeah, I made it. I made it. And I was so happy because I loved it. I loved it.
By that time, we had been traveling. We had done 2 concerts down in Salento. We did a concert in Monopoly. I did the seminary in Monopoly. We did a concert at Valentina Gramazio's house a couple of nights before. We were completely into it by that time. You know, the way we traveled around, the camaraderie, you know, a trip like that where you're in each other's face for a week straight. And really, we didn't stop. It either brings you really close or it either blows up or it brings you really close. And this one, we were, you know, arm in arm the whole time. It was a really, you know, I really loved that trip. And we had hoped to do it again in April. But so anyway, Daniela's been painting new things. So, and I've been going back and forth with her. She'll send me some things. I've learned how to get the piano, the electric piano, into the computer so I can digitize it and send it to her. So we're going back and forth. Georgia's teaching online. We talk from time to time, but I think right now it's like what I said, it's like a cocoon. We're inside this cocoon and things are still, you know, we're just not work from home and close the door. We've got we're really working together. So I think when the doors do open, then I can come back to Italy or Italy can come here. we're going to have some, you know, the next phase is going to be there. Because we were working over here, we were working to get ready to integrate some of Georgia with a group that I have with the cello player and Richard Poole and a bass player, Chris Rathman, who I've known, God, he was my first roommate in '73. And we're still buddies. So that's really what we've been trying to work on, not just isolate, but we're actually trying, you know, there's less noise in the equation now. So you can put, you know, you can grab what's essential and bring it in. And that seems to be the thing that I've been working with. And the same with Daniela, same with Georgia. So how did we go? We talked about everything. Dream notes. And I found the apartment in Puglia, in Bari, but I'm not there. I can't get into the country. You know, there's a beautiful apartment right over a business, you know, a real estate business. So if I put a piano there, it's not going to bother the people downstairs because they're not there.
Yeah.
So, and the price is perfect. The neighborhood, it's a block and a half away from where I normally stay. And about a block and a half away from there is this little club called Portineria, that's my home. That's my musical home. I can walk in there, and I've got a friend, a singer, very dear, Stefania Di Piero, who she was friends with the owner. I'm friends with the owner, so we can go in and play and rehearse whenever we want. But I just feel comfortable in the place. So I'm a block and a half away from there. So I got my two worlds, you know, I've got my friends.
So let's hope, we just have to hope the doors will reopen and everything will be.
America's got a little bit of a problem right now, there's a group of people that didn't really get affected the first time, you know, when this wave of infections came by. They didn't get affected, and they became, hey, we don't have to do anything. We'll just, you know, and suddenly it shifted. And right now, you know, Italy has come down to where there's practically nothing. And America went up, started to come down, and it's going up again. So I've been watching, you know, Belgium, the EU reports. They were going to, their plan is to open the frontiers on July 1, except they says there's so many infections in Brazil, America, and Russia, we're going to exclude them. So, and I don't blame them. Frankly, I don't blame them. They've had enough, and the people down south didn't learn the first time. They're learning now. New York City will not let people, if you come from any of these states on a plane, they're quarantining you. Because New York, I mean, they went through hell for how many months, and they're down in the, you know, nothing right now. So I don't know. I'm hoping, I mean, I've got a ticket for at the end of August. There's no way it's going to be open by then. Georgia and Danielle are going to come here in October, but I'm not sure that Trump's going to open the borders because he's got this thing with immigration. And so I've got another trip in November, and these are all frequent flyer trips, so I'm not paying for these, and so I can get reimbursed completely as well. So November's another one, or January is another one. So I'm coming. So
yeah, we're all on standby, waiting to see what happens and hoping that everything will be okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, there's certainly a lot going on here, just with all the turmoil and the sort of agitation. And anyway, it makes your blood move a little bit differently. So we're waiting and hoping to see you again soon.
I hope so too.
Hey, and thank you dearly for doing this interview, for inviting me to do the interview. I didn't get to speak in Italian. Non ho parlato in italiano, ma sono d'accordo con questo. It's a little bit easier. I can be more fluid. But the thing in Italian is I'm very careful. Ogni parola, prima di parlare, penso di ogni parola. So,
of course.
So I'm very careful. In English, it's like a waterfall.
Yes.
So.
And you can, and you're, you can express yourself at your top.
Yeah. I'm looking through I put a set list together of topics I guess that would be how to say it. It was a set list. I've talked about everything. I didn't get into advice Paul had given me, but, Lenocci's there, John is there, La Volpe, Daniela and Georgia, you and Valentina, Portineria, Mara. I didn't talk about Stefania Di Piero, top-notch singer. We wanted to meet. So this is the last story. We had wanted to meet, and how are we going to meet? She's busy, I'm busy. So I call her, and she calls me. She says, listen, I don't think we're going to have a chance to meet. I'm busy. I'm walking down Sperano right now. I says, well, I'm busy, and I'm walking up Sperano. This is one of the big avenues in Bari. She says, really? Where are you? I says, I'm at the Benetton. She says, I'm a block away. So we kept talking. She says, is that you with the orange T-shirt? I said, is that you with the yellow T-shirt? We spent 3 hours together, just both of us being busy. We just met. The vibe was such. And she says, we're going to play together. And she plays great Brazilian music. But with me, she wanted to play Aretha. She says, because I know you have that gospel thing in your left hand. And you got that punch. We kept it was standing room only at Portineria the last night that we played there. So there's more of that to come too. She's a dear, dear person. So keep juggling. Follow your nose is what Henry Miller used to say. It's the thing right in front of you. Okay. Oh, let me show one last.
Oh my goodness.
This was, it's a little bright. How do we get the light down? This was how I met Eva 4 years ago.
Yeah.
As I was looking for, who are these Italian singers? Who is this Tiziana? Who else? There was Daniela Spalletta, Susanna Stivali. Who are these people? And so I was gathering, I got this one. Hey, it's been my pleasure. This has been a 5-year odyssey, really. Unlike any other 5-year odysseys that I've come across, but they keep getting better.
Isn't that wonderful? A person who says it keeps getting better. That means life is blessing you with all that you're wishing for, or even more.
I think more, because I wouldn't have thought to wish for, this is, just the collaborations that I've had, way beyond anything I could have imagined. They just clicked, and we kept following it. And, I couldn't have, if I would have imagined doing something, I would have fallen way short. So it's like you open the door and, you let the good things in.
Yes, and things happen.
And they do. So just to be open while they're happening, or that they could happen, and the effect.
Yeah, you're in the flow, and it flows.
It really does. It really does. Like when Jay was talking, I could feel, I could see everything. She says, you know, I met this person introduced me to this person introduced me to this person, and here I am in, you know, at the Naropa Institute with, you know, people from Cherry Valley, actually, because Ann Waldman runs the place, and William Burroughs were there, Oregon was there, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, it was like, all these things put you in another space if you'll take the, you know, as long as you get on the first bus. So
yeah.
Anyway, the bus is rolling here, and it's been quite a trip, but it's not over. So I've got, you know, just given the possibility of being able to split my time between America and Italy, who knows what's that's going to lead. I just know that it's it should be done.
So
okay.
are we going to say goodbye to our listeners, or?
I don't know. I don't have anything else on my list to talk about. I'm sure we could come up with something.
So yes, because it's I wouldn't like the line to drop, because it's been already a bit more than an hour, like an hour, 10 minutes or 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Thank you so much for being with us, Pat.
No, thank you so much for having me come and be with you. That was
okay. So now we're saying goodbye to all the listeners. Please stay with me. I'm going to end the broadcast, and but please stay with me a moment longer. Yes.
You want me to stay with you, or do you want the listeners to stay with you?
No, you, because I'm going to end. Yes.
I'll be more than happy to stay with you.
So that I can say goodbye nicely, and
okay.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody, and thanks for being with us until now. Thank you so much.